Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping straight into an absolutely wild moment in modern history. We're going to look at how a burning New York borough in the 1970s collided head-on with Jamaican sound system culture and somehow birthed a multi-billion-dollar global empire. We're diving deep into the 1973 party revolution sparked by DJ Kool Herc. It's just this unbelievable story of displacement, crazy ingenuity, and a youth culture that quite literally changed the world.
Now, it sounds a bit crazy, right? So here is the core question we really need to explore. Can a massive globe-spanning culture actually be traced back to just one single room on a single night in August 1973? I mean, historians usually argue that cultural movements develop slowly, right? They pop up across many places all at once. But in the oral history of hip-hop, there is this one legendary pinpoint origin story.
And DJ Kool Herc himself actually captured that mythical status perfectly. He said, 1520 Sedgwick is the Bethlehem of hip-hop culture. It's a hugely powerful statement, elevating what was basically a completely ordinary brick high-rise in the Bronx into a sacred, almost religious site for music lovers. But, to understand exactly why this specific building and this specific DJ became so legendary, we've got to rewind a few years. We need to look at the cultural DNA that was brought into that space.
To set the scene for you, the year is 1967. A 13-year-old boy named Clive Campbell, who, of course, would later be known to the entire world as the legendary DJ Kool Herc, emigrates with his family from Kingston, Jamaica, all the way to the Bronx in New York City. And the thing is, he didn't leave his culture behind. He carried the vibrant, booming sights and sounds of Kingston right into his brand new neighborhood.
But Herc's arrival contrasted pretty sharply with a very bleak socioeconomic backdrop. The Bronx in the late 1960s and early 70s was really struggling. The construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway had just uprooted thousands of people, fracturing communities, and totally accelerating white flight. Landlords were literally setting fire to their own buildings just for the insurance money. That's actually where that infamous, tragic phrase, "the Bronx is burning," comes from. It was a landscape plagued by a terrible heroin epidemic and intense street gang violence. This was the incredible, everyday adversity facing the youth living there at the time.
So how did they cope with all that? Well, they looked to their roots. Hip-hop wasn't just created in a vacuum out of nowhere. It's really reggae's child. The traditional Jamaican yard party, which was basically a community gathering fueled by massive, towering speakers, evolved directly into the Bronx block party. And that Jamaican sound system DJ, who was the absolute heartbeat of the event, they became the blueprint for the hip-hop DJ.
And crucially, we have this concept of toasting. Down in Jamaica, DJs would rhythmically chant and speak over the music to hype up the crowd. Herc brought this exact tradition with him to New York. By punctuating his records with high-energy slang phrases, stuff like, "Rock on, my mellow," or "To the beat, y'all," Herc laid the absolute foundation for the MC. He was essentially creating the prototype for the hip-hop rapper, right there on the spot.
Okay, so all of this cultural DNA finally converges on one specific date, August 11th, 1973. A teenage girl wanted to earn some extra cash to buy some back-to-school clothes, so she decides to throw a party in the recreation room of her apartment building at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. And she asks her 18-year-old brother Herc to play the music. What is so amazing to me is how wonderfully grassroots this whole thing was. To cover the costs and make a little bit of money for those clothes, the entry fee was literally just 25 cents for girls and 50 cents for guys. Just imagine that, paying 50 cents to witness the actual birth of a global culture. Their dad picked up sodas and beer from a local warehouse, their mom served snacks. It was just a regular, humble family effort for the neighborhood kids.
Now, for decades, this party was basically just an oral legend. People talked about it, but there wasn't much proof. But then, historians actually managed to recover the original, handwritten index cards used as invitations. It firmly grounds this legend in historical reality. The flyer confirms the whole thing, a DJ Kool Herc party, back-to-school jam, 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, in the Rec Room, August 11th, 1973. It is absolutely incredible to have physical proof of a cultural genesis point like that.
And you might be wondering, who actually wrote those index cards? Well, it was Cindy Campbell, Herc's younger sister. We talk a lot about the fathers of hip-hop, but Cindy is rightfully deemed the first lady of hip-hop. She didn't just casually throw a party. She conceived the whole idea, styled her brother's clothes, managed all the logistics, and effectively became the very first hip-hop promoter in history. She just hired her brother to show up and do what he did best.
And what Herc did best was spark a complete musical revolution. See, commercial radio and those fancy uptown disco clubs were catering to an older crowd at the time. But Herc knew exactly what the neighborhood teenagers actually wanted. He noticed that the crowd would absolutely lose their minds during the really short, heavily percussive instrumental portions of hard funk records, especially tracks by James Brown. These isolated, super high-energy drum beats were known as the break.
So Herc developed this brilliant technique to keep that specific energy going, which he famously called the merry-go-round. He'd find the percussion break, place 2 copies of the exact same record on 2 separate turntables, and then, right as the break ended on the first record, he'd seamlessly cue up the beginning of that same break on the second one. This allowed him to extend a groove that was maybe 15 seconds long into what sources describe as a 5-minute loop of fury.
And this extended rhythm, it gave the dancers the time and the space they needed to really go off. Herc himself coined the terms break boys and break girls, or simply B-boys and B-girls to describe the kids who were breaking. Back then, breaking was just street slang for getting super excited or acting energetically to his beats. Over 50 years later, that exact terminology is still used globally in the sport of breakdancing.
Soon enough, Herc's reputation absolutely exploded. He became this massive local folk hero. But the local clubs were still heavily plagued by gang violence. So Herc literally took his massive sound system, which was famous for its sheer, earth-shaking volume, straight out of the clubs and into the schoolyards and parks. And get this, to power the whole setup, they would unscrew the base of city streetlights, illegally tap directly into the city's power grid, and boom, an instant earth-shaking block party.
And this is where the cultural impact becomes truly staggering. The music genuinely began to heal the city. Writer Stephen Hager noted that for over 5 years, the Bronx had basically lived in constant terror of street gangs. But suddenly, around 1975, they just began to disappear. Influential figures like Afrika Bambaataa, who was actually once a general in the notorious Black Spades gang, heard Herc's music, got his own sound system, and started converting gang members into the peaceful, music-focused Zulu nation.
But right as this grassroots movement is really finding its footing, a massive external shock hits the city and changes everything. In 1977, New York City was abruptly plunged into total darkness by a massive citywide power outage.
Now, the blackout hit a city that was already suffering from severe poverty and unemployment. Widespread looting broke out and audio equipment stores were heavily targeted. Grandmaster Kaz, who is a true hip-hop pioneer, points out that out of the total chaos of the blackout, opportunity literally sprang up overnight. Hundreds of kids suddenly had the turntables and mixers they desperately needed to become DJs, gear they could never have afforded otherwise. Kaz believes this blackout equipped a whole new generation to express themselves musically, completely blowing the doors off the movement and accelerating it way beyond Herc's control.
Just think about the sheer speed of this evolution for a second. It is breathtaking. From a young boy arriving from Jamaica in 1967 to that tiny grassroots party in 1973 to effectively pacifying street gangs by 1975, which was then supercharged by a blackout in 1977, and by 1979, a mere 6 years after Cindy's Rec Room Party, the very first commercial hip-hop hit was released to the world.
And hey, speaking of that first commercial record, we absolutely have to circle back to a recurring theme here, the incredible women behind the scenes. Just as Cindy Campbell had the vision to promote the very first party, it was another woman, record executive Sylvia Robinson, who assembled the Sugar Hill Gang and recorded Rapper's Delight in 1979. Women were fundamental not just to the birth, but to the booming business of hip-hop.
Which leaves us with this pretty incredible thought. Today, hip-hop is a multi-billion-dollar global industry dictating fashion, language, and culture all over the world. But the next time you hear a modern track, remember those Jamaican sound systems, remember a Bronx city burning, and ask yourself, does the raw unifying soul of this massive global movement still echo from that humble 25-cent party? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep digging into the roots of the music you love, and I'll see you next time.